virgin Amish man won 8 desperate mail-order brides, but he had shocking plans. The auction bell clangs. Dust swirls through the town square. A quiet farm boy raises his hand for a plow, and suddenly, 8 abandoned brides are thrust into his care. The crowd roars with laughter. What's a virgin Amish man need with 8 wives? But instead of shame, he offers them something no one expected: land, shelter, and dignity. Soon, lamplight glows in his lonely cabin, and hope flickers where despair once lived. But whispers grow darker. Railroad men claim the valley, and a banker sharpens his claws. Secrets among the women threaten to tear them apart, and one hidden past could destroy everything they're fighting for. Thunder of hooves, flames in the night. A man who swore never to raise a weapon stands at the edge of ruin. Can faith and mercy shield them from the ruthless hand of greed? Or will this shocking plan end in heartbreak and fire? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The afternoon sun beat down on Clear Creek's dusty town square as Gary Yoder shifted uncomfortably on his wagon seat. He had come to town for one purpose, only to bid on second-hand farm tools at the monthly auction. His father's old plow had finally broken beyond repair, and he needed something sturdy to break the spring soil. The square teemed with activity. Ranchers in weathered hats clustered near the hitching posts, trading news about grass conditions and cattle prices. Freight wagons creaked past, loaded with barrels and crates. Outside the general store, women in calico dresses shared quiet conversations behind raised hands. Gary's attention fixed on the auctioneer's block, a rough wooden platform where items were displayed for bidding. His heart sank when he saw 8 women standing there in travel-worn dresses, their faces drawn with exhaustion and worry. Mail-order brides, he realized, whose promised husbands had failed to appear. The auctioneer, red-faced and sweating in his striped vest, shuffled through some papers. Next lot: farm implements. 1 plow, slightly used, good condition. Gary raised his hand, eager to bid on the very item he'd come for. But the clerk's eyes widened as he scribbled something in his ledger. Bid accepted from Gary Yoder for the lot of 8. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Gary's stomach dropped as he realized the terrible mistake. The clerk had marked him down for the women, not the plow. Raucous laughter erupted from the onlookers. "Look at that virgin Amish boy," someone shouted. "Reckon he needs all 8 to figure out what goes where." Gary's face burned hot beneath his beard. The women on the platform drew closer together, their expressions a mixture of fear and resignation. One dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief while another gripped her carpetbag so tight her knuckles showed white. Sheriff Merrick stepped forward, hook thumbs in his gun belt. "If there ain't no legitimate claims, these women become wards of the town. We'll have to find suitable arrangements." His tone suggested those arrangements might be less than respectable. Jerry's hands trembled as he gripped the wagon reins. Everything in him wanted to slip away from this awkward situation. But when he looked at those women, at their dignity, even in distress, he couldn't bear to abandon them to whatever fate Clear Creek might devise. Drawing a deep breath, Gary stood up in his wagon. "I will give them shelter," he announced, his quiet voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. "My farm has room enough." Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Merrick's eyes narrowed. "Now see here, Yoder. I have a good barn that can be fitted for proper living space," Gary continued, his voice growing stronger. "Clean water from my well. Land that can feed many mouths, if worked right." He turned to address the women directly. "I offer you honest shelter and protection, nothing more. You'll be free to stay or leave as you choose." The women exchanged uncertain glances. The oldest among them, a stern-faced woman in a navy traveling dress, stepped forward. "And what do you expect in return for this generosity?" "Only that you help with the work of the farm, as you are able," Gary replied. I make no other claims on you." More whispers rustled through the crowd. Someone called out, "Ain't natural, a man taking in strange women like that." The sun was sinking toward the horizon now, painting long shadows across the square. Gary climbed down from his wagon and approached the platform, ignoring the continuing murmurs and jokes. He offered his hand to help the women down, one by one. "You'll be safe," he assured them quietly. "I give you my word before God." The women gathered their modest belongings, carpet bags and small trunks that held all they owned in the world. Gary helped them arrange themselves on his wagon, making sure everyone had a secure place to sit. Their faces showed a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. As Gary took up the reins again, more crude jokes and whispers followed them. But he kept his eyes forward, his back straight. The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled out of the town square, leaving the gossip and laughter behind. The eldest woman spoke softly from behind him. "Thank you, Mr. Yoder. Whatever your reasons, thank you." Gary nodded, his throat too tight for words. He hadn't come to town planning to become responsible for 8 lives. But as his wagon rolled toward home through the gathering dusk, he felt a certainty that he had done what was right. Whatever challenges might lie ahead, the morning sun painted the eastern sky in soft pastels as Gary's wagon creaked along the rutted road leading north from Clear Creek. His team of horses plodded forward with steady determination, their hooves raising small puffs of dust. In the wagon bed behind him, the 8 women sat close together, their carpet bags and small trunks secured with rope. The wooden wheels squeaked over a particularly rough patch, making everyone sway. Gary heard a few muffled gasps, but no complaints. These women had already weathered far worse than a bumpy wagon ride, Mr. Yoder. A clear voice rose above the wagon's creaking. Gary glanced back to find a pair of steady dark eyes studying him. The woman who had spoken sat straight-backed against the wagon side, her black hair neatly braided. He had noticed her quiet dignity at the auction block. "I am Jasmine Deerfield," she continued. "I taught at the mission school in Indian Territory." Her accent carried hints of both refined education and her Cherokee heritage. "Why would you take us in? You owe us nothing." Gary's hands tightened on the reins as he considered his answer. "A man's duty is to provide shelter, not shame," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "My father taught me that before he passed." Jasmine nodded slowly, as if measuring the truth in his words. Around her, the other women began to stir, sharing glances that held less suspicion than before. The oldest woman, her gray-streaked hair tucked beneath a navy bonnet, spoke up. "I'm Sarah Miller. Was a nurse during the war until my husband fell at Antietam." Her worn hands twisted in her lap. "Thought I'd found a fresh start out here, but Mary Beth Cooper," offered a younger woman in a faded green dress. "I was a seamstress in Boston before the fire took my shop. The advertisement promised a new life with a banker." She gave a bitter laugh. Should have known better. One by one, the women shared fragments of their stories. A farmer's daughter from Ohio, a merchant's widow from St. Louis, a young woman whose mother had escaped slavery, who had saved for 2 years to travel west. Each tale spoke of hope turned to desperation, of promises broken by mid-afternoon. Exhaustion showed plain on their faces. The sun beat down mercilessly, and dust coated their traveling clothes. Gary passed back his water jug without comment, making sure each woman had her share. As dusk approached, the wagon finally crested the last low hill. Below them spread Gary's farmstead, a solid log house with a stone chimney, a well-built barn, and rough-fenced pastures where a few cattle grazed. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods. "It ain't much," Gary said apologetically as he guided the horses down the slope. "But the roof don't leak, and there's good water in the well." He helped the women down from the wagon, supporting trembling arms and steadying uncertain feet. Their faces showed a mixture of wariness and desperate relief as they filed into the house. Inside, lamplight cast a warm glow over the simple furnishings. The main room held a plank table, straight-back chairs, and a stone hearth. The smell of cornbread lingered in the air. Gary had baked extra the day before, knowing he'd be gone to town. "Please sit," he gestured to the chairs. "Eat something before you rest." The women settled around the table, their movements hesitant at first. Gary served thick slices of cornbread and cups of fresh well water. Gradually, the silence gave way to quiet conversation. "The bread is good," Sarah offered, her stern face softening slightly. "My mother's recipe," Gary replied, ducking his head at the praise. As the meal drew to a close, Jasmine caught his eye. She spoke a few soft words in Cherokee, then translated. "We thank you for your kindness, Gary Yoder." Though he hadn't understood the native words, their meaning touched something deep in his heart. He nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. That night, as Gary settled into his small bedroom off the main room, he listened to the unfamiliar sounds of his home. Quiet footsteps on wooden floors. Murmured conversations. The creak of the extra bedding he'd arranged in the loft. Where once the farmhouse had held only his solitude, now it sheltered 8 souls seeking refuge. He thought of his father's teachings about hospitality, about duty to those in need. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events was God's way of ending his loneliness, of bringing life back to this too-quiet house. With that comforting thought, Gary drifted off to sleep while above him, his unexpected guests found their first peaceful rest in many days. Dawn broke over the farmstead as roosters announced the new day with proud crows. Gary rose from his bed, bones aching from yesterday's long journey. He pulled on his work boots and headed out to the barn, the grass still heavy with dew beneath his feet. The crunch of footsteps made him turn. Several of the women had emerged from the house, wrapping shawls tight against the morning chill. They gathered uncertainly near the porch, watching as he hitched his team of horses to begin the day's work. "Would you like to see how it's done?" Gary offered quietly, noting their curiosity as he approached the cow's stall. The women drew closer, and he demonstrated how to position the milk pail and create a steady rhythm. The cow shifted but stayed, calm under his gentle hands. "It seems simple enough," Mary Beth said, though her expression suggested otherwise. Next came gathering eggs, and Sarah volunteered to help, carefully reaching beneath the hens to collect warm brown eggs in her apron. The other women explored the barn with cautious steps, taking in the neat rows of tools and the sweet smell of fresh hay. "I can cook," Jasmine stepped forward, her voice carrying quiet authority. "My grandmother taught me to make biscuits, and I see you have a good supply of beans." Gary nodded gratefully. Soon, the scent of baking biscuits filled the house, drawing everyone inside. They gathered around the table, an awkward family bound by circumstance rather than choice. The food was simple but filling, and Gary waited until all had eaten their fill before clearing his throat. "I reckon you're wondering what happens next," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I aim to be plain about my intentions." The women stilled, tension filling the room. Some gripped their cups tighter, while others seemed to brace themselves for disappointment. "I don't intend to marry any of you," Gary continued. A few gasps broke the silence, but he pressed on. "What I'm offering instead is a chance for each of you to own land, your own parcel of this farm, earned through honest work." Disbelieving. Laughter burst from Mary Beth, while tears spilled down Sarah's weathered cheeks. The youngest woman, barely more than a girl, stared at Gary with wide eyes. "Own land?" she whispered. "But women can't. There's no law against it," Jasmine spoke up, her dark eyes bright with understanding. "Unusual, yes, but not impossible. You'd truly give us that chance?" Another woman asked, doubt clear in her voice. "What's the catch?" Gary shook his head. "No catch. Just work and time and learning to manage the land proper. Each woman who stays can earn her own piece of earth to farm or build on as she chooses. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Some women smiled with newfound hope, while others exchanged skeptical glances. "It's a fine idea," Sarah said slowly. "But what about the town? They already mock us. And some men won't take kindly to women owning property." "One man alone can't protect us all," Mary Beth added. Voicing what others clearly feared, Gary acknowledged their concerns with a grave nod. "I can't promise it'll be easy. But this land is mine free and clear, and I aim to share it fair with those willing to work for it." After breakfast, Gary hitched his wagon for a trip to Clear Creek. They needed flour, seed, and other supplies if they were to make this unusual arrangement work. The women watched him leave, their faces showing a mix of hope and uncertainty. The town seemed different in the harsh light of day. Whispers followed Gary as he loaded his purchases, and more than one storefront door closed as he passed. At the feed store, William Morris, the banker, cornered him between stacks of seed bags. "Quite a spectacle you made yesterday, Yoder," Morris sighed, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Taking in all those women might make folks wonder if you can manage your mortgage payments." "My payments are up to date," Gary replied evenly, though his stomach clenched. "For now," Morris agreed. "But times change. Land values shift. Terms get adjusted." He patted Gary's shoulder with false friendliness before walking away. The ride home seemed longer, Morris's veiled threats weighing heavy on Gary's mind. But as he approached the farmstead, unexpected changes caught his eye. Clean curtains hung in the windows, made from what looked like someone's petticoat. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the front step had been swept clean. Inside, he found them cabin transformed. The women had scrubbed floors, arranged their few belongings, and hung herbs to dry from the rafters. A stew pot bubbled on the hearth, filling the air with savory smells. They moved about the space with purpose, as if they'd lived there for months. Instead of a single day, Jasmine looked up from where she was teaching the youngest girl to knead bread dough. Her quiet smile told Gary all he needed to know. These women meant to stay, meant to make this improbable dream work. Looking at their determination, Gary felt his earlier fears begin to fade. Whatever the banker had planned, these women had already proven themselves stronger than anyone suspected. Perhaps together, they could make this work after all. The morning brought steady rain drumming against the farmhouse roof. Gary stood the window, watching droplets stream down the glass as he pulled on his boots. The day's work wouldn't wait, rain or shine. In the kitchen, chaos reigned. Mary Beth let out a cry as eggs slipped from her fingers, shattering on the plank floor. Sarah struggled with the woodpile, her soft hands already showing angry red blisters from the axe handle. The other women darted about like startled chickens. Unsure where to begin, Jasmine's calm voice cut through the confusion. "Let's organize ourselves," she said, moving to help Mary Beth clean up the broken eggs. "There's no shame in learning. We'll start with what each person can manage best." She began assigning tasks with quiet authority. The youngest girls were set to gathering eggs, carefully this time. Those with stronger arms took turns at the woodpile, while others helped in the kitchen. Jasmine kept them focused, reading aloud from Gary's mother's old recipe book as they worked. 2 cups of flour, she read clearly, 1 pinch of salt. Her voice brought order to the morning's disorder. Gary watched from the doorway, grateful for her natural leadership. These women needed time to learn, and Jasmine seemed to understand that better than most. He headed out to the barn, the rain soaking through his shirt as he crossed the yard. As evening approached, voices carried through the drizzle, unwelcome voices. A group of men from town had ridden up, their horses stamping in the mud. Gary set down his tools and walked out to meet them. "Well, if it ain't the virgin preacher man," one called out, alcohol thick on his breath. "Running yourself." A fine establishment here, ain't you? Another man laughed crudely. Heard you've got yourself a whole house full of willing women. Mighty charitable of you, Yoder. The women had gathered on the porch, faces tight with fear and anger. Gary planted his feet firmly in the yard. You're not welcome here, he said quietly but clearly. These are decent women under my protection. I suggest you leave. Protection? The drunk man sneered. That what they're calling it now. Leave, Gary repeated, his voice harder now. Or I'll have the sheriff remove you. The men grumbled but turned their horses around, shouting insults as they rode away. Gary's hands were shaking, but he kept them clasped behind his back, where no one could see. The rain continued falling as dusk settled in. Hoofbeats approached again, but this time it was Sheriff Merrick, his badge catching what little light remained. He dismounted, looking uncomfortable. Evening, Yoder, he said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. Got some official business here. Gary took the document, reading it by the light spilling from the house windows. His stomach dropped. This can't be right, he said, looking up at the sheriff. This land's been deeded to my family for 20 years. Railroads claiming they have prior rights to the valley, Merrick explained. You've got 60 days to prove your boundary claims, or they'll take possession. Behind Gary, someone gasped. The women had crowded closer to hear. 60 days? Gary's voice was barely audible above the rain. To find deeds that might be lost or destroyed. The sheriff shrugged, already turning back to his horse. Just delivering the notice, Yoder. Ain't my business to judge it. After he rode away, silence fell heavy as the rain. The women huddled on the porch, their faces pale in the gathering dark. What'll we do? Mary Beth whispered. Where will we go? Panic rippled through the group. Some began to cry softly, while others spoke in frightened whispers about returning to town. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice steady. Let us pray, she said, taking the hands of those nearest her. The Lord tests the faithful through hardship, but he does not abandon them. One by one, the women joined hands in a circle. Jasmine's prayer rose clear and strong above the rain, speaking of courage and hope. Even those who didn't share her faith seemed comforted by her words. Later that night, Gary sat alone at his kitchen table. The legal notice spread before him. Thunder rolled across the valley, and wind rattled the windows. In the room above, he could hear the quiet movements of the women preparing for bed. 8 lives now depended on him. 8 futures balanced on his ability to prove what he knew to be true, that this land belonged to his family. He traced his finger across the paper, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper onto his shoulders. The rain fell steadily. Outside, marking time against the 60 days they had left to save their home. Morning light streamed through parting clouds, washing the farmyard in golden warmth. The rain-soaked earth steamed gently as Gary hitched the horses to his wagon. Sarah and Emma, 2 of the younger women, climbed aboard alongside Jasmine for the journey to the county records office. Mind those garden plots while we're gone, Jasmine called to the others gathered on the porch. The soil's perfect for planting after that rain. The wagon wheels cut fresh tracks in the muddy road as they made their way into town. Gary sat straight-backed on the driver's seat, his thoughts churning like the wheels below. Everything depended on finding proof of his family's claim. The county records office occupied a corner of the courthouse, its windows dusty and unwelcoming. Inside, the clerk barely glanced up from his ledger as they entered, though his mouth twisted with obvious displeasure at seeing Gary with the women. Land records, Gary said simply, removing his hat. For the North Valley homestead. The clerk's chair scraped against the wooden floor as he stood, making a show of his inconvenience. He pulled a large map from a drawer and spread it across the counter with deliberate slowness. Railroads already filed their claim, he said, jabbing a finger at red lines drawn across the valley. See here? Spur lines going right through your so-called farm. Gary studied the map, his jaw tightening. The proposed railroad cut straight through his best pasture land, through the creek that watered his stock, through the very heart of what his father had built. My father established those boundaries 20 years ago, he said quietly. There were survey stakes. He wrote about them in his letters to the land office. Those records seem to have gone missing, the clerk replied, not bothering to hide his smirk. Mighty convenient for some, I reckon. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. We'd like copies of whatever documents you do have, please. The clerk's expression soured further at being addressed by a Cherokee woman, but he couldn't refuse an official request. He disappeared into the back room, returning with a thin stack of papers. 2 cents per page, he said, holding them just out of reach. Gary counted out the coins while Sarah and Emma exchanged worried glances. The papers revealed little they didn't already know, but they took them anyway. Back at the farm, the other women hadn't been idle. Mary Beth and Catherine had organized a mending circle on the porch, their needles flashing in the sunlight as they repaired torn work shirts and patched quilts. In the side yard, 3 others worked the soil with hoes, marking out neat rows. For vegetables. The wagon returned as evening approached, its passengers dusty and discouraged. But there was no time to dwell on their frustrating day. Chores needed doing, and supper needed cooking. Over bowls of bean soup and cornbread, Gary shared what they'd learned, or hadn't learned, at the records office. The women's faces grew serious as they understood the threat more clearly. There must be something, Jasmine said thoughtfully. Your father wouldn't have settled here without keeping proof of his claim. Gary's eyes lifted to the ceiling, considering. The loft above. There might be, he said slowly. In Father's old trunk. After the dishes were cleared, Gary climbed the loft ladder and dragged a heavy trunk into the lamplight. Dust coated its leather surface, and its brass fittings had dulled with age. The women gathered around as he opened it, revealing carefully folded quilts his mother had made. Beneath the quilts lay bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbon. Gary's hands trembled slightly as he lifted them out. These were his father's words, preserved through the years. Would you read them? He asked. Jasmine softly. My eyes ain't what they used to be in this light. Jasmine took the letters carefully, settling herself near the lamp. The other women drew closer as she began to read in her clear, steady voice. My dearest brother, she read, the valley opens before me like God's own garden. I have walked the boundaries today, marking the survey stakes according to the land office's instructions. 300 paces north from the lightning-struck oak, then west to the creek's bend. Gary leaned forward, hope kindling in his chest. His father's precise descriptions continued, marking each corner of the property with landmarks that still stood. Most importantly, the letter was dated 5 years before the railroad had even reached their territory. There's more, Jasmine said, sorting through the papers. Maps he drew, receipts from the land office. Her eyes shone in the lamplight. This could be what we need. The women broke into excited whispers, hope spreading through the room like the lamp's warm glow. Gary sat back in his chair, feeling the weight on his shoulders lift slightly. They hadn't won yet, but they had found something to fight with. Through the window, stars began to appear in the clearing sky. The old trunk sat open, its treasures spread across the table, letters and documents that might just save their home. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at the Yoder farm, like a well-worn path growing more familiar with each passing step. The early morning light found Gary in the barn, teaching Sarah and Catherine how to milk the cows without startling them. Their hands, once soft from city living, grew steadier with each try. Like this, he demonstrated, his quiet voice barely disturbing the barn's peace. Gentle but firm. In the kitchen, Mary Beth discovered she had a talent for bread making, her strong arms kneading dough while humming hymns she remembered from back east. The smell of fresh bread soon became a daily comfort, drawing everyone to the table at mealtimes like a dinner bell. Emma and Rebecca took to the garden work, their backs growing stronger as they tended the sprouting vegetables. They learned to read the weather in the clouds and planned their work accordingly. The other women found their places too, mending, cleaning, helping with whatever needed doing. Jasmine watched it all with quiet satisfaction, noting how the household was finding its natural order. But she saw something else too, the hunger for learning in these women's eyes. After supper one evening, she cleared the wooden table and pulled out some papers she'd been saving. "Who wants to learn their letters?" she asked, and 7 hands shot up immediately. And so their evenings transformed. The main room filled with lamplight and the soft sounds of chalk on slate as Jasmine taught basic reading and mathematics. She'd learned these skills at the mission school, and now she passed them on with patience and care. 2 plus 3 makes 5, she explained, drawing the numbers clearly. Just like 5 fence posts or 5 eggs, numbers are everywhere on a farm. The lessons drew unexpected attention. Farm children from neighboring homesteads began appearing at the windows, faces pressed against the glass, drawn by the sound of women's voices singing out arithmetic tables together. Their curious eyes watched as Jasmine moved among her students, correcting here, encouraging their. One Sunday evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Gary gathered everyone in the main room. He opened his father's old Bible, its pages worn smooth by years of faithful hands. His finger found the passage he'd been saving. "Family is built not by blood alone," he read slowly, "but by the bonds of love and faith that tie hearts together." The women sat in thoughtful silence, some wiping tears from their eyes. Each had left behind a dream of marriage, but here they were finding something different, something perhaps even more precious. A family crafted from necessity and nurtured by choice. Rebecca spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd find a home again after everything. But here we are, ain't we? A real family, strange as it may look to others." Heads nodded around the room. Even the most hesitant among them had to admit they'd become more than just a collection of stranded souls. But their peace wasn't without its shadows. The next day, the banker, Mr. Harrison, rode past the farm on his sleek bay horse. His eyes swept over the flourishing garden and the women working there, his face dark with disapproval. Gary, splitting wood by the fence, straightened up and met his gaze steadily until the banker moved on. That evening, as Jasmine helped him clean up after supper, Gary voiced the fear that had been gnawing at him. "What if the railroad brings a new survey?" he asked quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. "What if they say my father's letters don't count for nothing against their fancy documents?" Jasmine paused in her work, considering her words carefully. "Truth written in a man's hand may yet stand," she said finally. "Your father walked this land, marked it with his own steps. That means something." Gary nodded, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. After the women had gone to bed, he slipped outside into the cool night air. The stars spread above him like diamond dust scattered across black velvet, the same stars his father had used to guide his way here 20 years ago. Kneeling in the soft grass, Gary bowed his head. No words came at first, just the weight of 8 lives depending on him, the responsibility of protecting this unexpected family. Finally, his lips moved in silent prayer, asking not for himself but for the courage to face whatever trials lay ahead. The night wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint sounds of crickets and the distant cry of a whippoorwill. Inside the farmhouse, a lamp still burned where Jasmine sat up late, checking the women's writing practice from that evening's lesson. Through the window, she saw Gary's kneeling figure and smiled softly, understanding that some prayers need no words to be heard. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear as Gary hitched the wagon for the weekly market run. He needed supplies, flour, sugar, and tools for the growing farm. The women had asked to come along, tired of being hidden away. He couldn't deny them that dignity. The market square bustled with activity when they arrived. Farmers haggled over livestock prices while children chased each other between stalls. The noise died down as Gary's wagon rolled to a stop. 8 women climbed down, dressed in their cleanest work clothes, heads held high. "Well, if it ain't the virgin Amish boy and his harem," someone called out. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Gary's face flushed, but he kept his movements steady as he helped Sarah, who had a bad ankle, down from the wagon. The women split up to do their shopping, moving in pairs as they'd planned. Jasmine stood beside Gary at the grain merchant's stall, helping him calculate their flour needs. Her presence seemed to calm him, like still water on a hot day. But peace wasn't meant to last. "Yoder." The banker's voice cut through the market chatter. Harrison strode toward them, his boots kicking up dust. "I see you're still playing house with these strays." Gary turned slowly. "Mr. Harrison, these ladies are under my protection. Nothing improper about that. Naive boy." Harrison's voice dripped with contempt. "You think you can change how the world works? A man living alone with 8 women, it ain't natural. What ain't natural is leaving honest women to suffer when I have shelter to share." Gary's quiet words carried across the now silent market. "I reckon I sleep better at night knowing that." Harrison's face darkened, but before he could respond, the women began gathering back at the wagon, their shopping done. They moved with purpose, ignoring the stares and whispers. The ride home was quiet, but not defeated. As they approached the farmhouse, the smell of baking filled the air. Inside, they found Mary Beth and Emma had stayed behind to surprise them, fresh pies cooling on every available surface. "For church tomorrow," Mary Beth explained, flour still dusting her apron. "Ain't nothing speaks louder than good pie." Sunday morning found them all in their best clothes, the pies carefully wrapped. Gary's wagon was first to arrive at the white-clapboard church. He helped each woman down, ignoring the shocked faces of arriving families. Inside, they filled an entire pew. The whispers started immediately, harsh little sounds like rattlesnakes in the grass. But then Pastor Roberts stepped up to the pulpit, his Bible open wide. "Today's sermon," he announced, "is on charity." His eyes swept the congregation. True charity isn't just giving what's easy. It's giving what's right, even when the world doesn't understand. The whispers died down as he spoke of Christ's love for all, of judgment left to God alone. Gary sat straight-backed, feeling the women's tension ease beside him as the familiar hymns filled the air. After the service, church families gathered outside to share food and conversation. The women's pies disappeared quickly, drawing compliments that seemed to surprise even those giving them. But the real surprise came when several children gathered around Jasmine, who had settled on a shady bench. "Tell us a story," a small girl begged, remembering the schoolteacher from town. Jasmine smiled, her eyes warming. "Well, in my people's tradition, we have a tale about a rabbit who helped build the world." The children sat cross-legged in the grass, enchanted by her gentle voice and expressive hands. Other women from the congregation drifted closer, drawn by the story. Soon Sarah was sharing a song from her childhood in Ireland, her clear voice rising sweet and true. Rebecca added harmony she'd learned in her father's church back east. The afternoon stretched long and golden. When they finally loaded up the empty pie tins, several churchwomen pressed notes into their hands, invitations to sewing circles and recipe swaps. That evening, they gathered in the main room, the hearth crackling with warmth. The mood was light, celebratory. Catherine taught them a folk song from her German grandmother. Emma shared funny stories about her days working in a Boston hat shop. Even the quietest among them joined in the laughter. Gary sat in his father's old chair, watching it all. The lonely house that had echoed with silence for so long now rang with life. Different languages, different songs, different stories, all weaving together into something new and precious. He thought about Harrison's words at the market. The banker was wrong. This wasn't about changing the world. It was about doing what was right in the small piece of it God had given him to tend. Looking around at these faces lit by firelight, Gary knew he'd never regret that choice. The morning sun cast long shadows as Gary led the women to the property's edge. His father's letters had described boundary markers, old oak posts driven deep into the earth decades ago. Finding them could help prove their claim. "Spread out in pairs," Jasmine directed, her dark hair tied back with a faded ribbon. "Look for weathered posts about chest-high. Some might be hidden by brush." The women fanned out across the meadow, wielding hoes and shovels to clear thick grass. Sarah and Emma worked the western line, while Catherine and Rebecca took the eastern edge. Jasmine stayed close to Gary, studying his father's hand-drawn map. "Here," Mary Beth called out near midday. She'd uncovered a post, its wood gray with age but still solid. Gary hurried over, running his fingers along the surface until he found it, a carved Y nearly worn smooth by time. "That's Father's mark," he said quietly. Relief colored his voice. He branded all his posts this way. They worked through the heat of the day, stopping only for water and bread. By late afternoon, they'd uncovered 6 posts, each bearing the same weathered initial. Jasmine carefully recorded their locations in a notebook, mapping the property's true boundaries out as dusk approached. Rebecca got a cook fire going. Soon the smell of rabbit stew drifted across the yard. They gathered around the flames, passing tin bowls and sharing the day's small victories. 7 more posts to find, Jasmine said, reviewing her notes by lantern light. If they're all marked the same way, the sound of approaching horses cut through the evening quiet. Gary stood, motioning for the women to stay seated. 3 riders emerged from the shadows, their horses' hooves kicking up dust in the dying light. "Evening," the lead rider called out, his voice hard despite the pleasant greeting. He wore a suit, coat despite the day's heat, a railroad company pin glinting on his lapel. "Can I help you?" Gary asked calmly. The man produced a sheaf of papers, waving them in the firelight. "Notice of eviction, authorized by the territorial court. This land's been properly surveyed and claimed for the railroad's new spur line." "We're aware of the dispute," Gary replied, "but the matter hasn't been settled in court. Until then, this remains my father's homestead." The second rider spat into the dirt. "Ain't no dispute, boy. Papers are clear as day. You and your collection here need to clear out." Gary's hands clenched at his sides, but his voice stayed steady. "No, sir. We'll wait for the court's proper ruling." "Have it your way." The lead rider's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But we'll be back. Railroad don't take kindly to squatters." He wheeled his horse around, the others following, especially those harboring runaway women. Their laughter carried back through the darkness as they rode away. The women huddled closer to the fire, its warmth no longer enough to chase away the chill of fear. "Inside," Jasmine said softly. "All of us." They filed into the cabin, securing doors and windows. Sarah began to cry quietly, and Catherine put an arm around her shoulders. The others sat close together, jumping at every night sound. Gary moved among them, lighting extra lamps until the cabin glowed warm and bright. "We'll take turns keeping watch tonight," he said. "But first, let us pray." They joined hands in a circle, heads bowed. Gary's voice was strong and clear as he asked for protection, for courage, for guidance. When he finished, some of the fear had eased from the women's faces. "I made you all a promise," he reminded them. "This is your home now, too. I won't let anyone drive us out." "But what can we do?" Emma asked. "They have authority papers." "They have false papers," Jasmine corrected. We're finding the real boundary posts. We just need more proof, Gary nodded. There are others who remember my father's claim, old settlers who helped him mark these lines. I need to find them, get their testimony. You're leaving? Rebecca's voice shook slightly. Just for a few days, he assured them. Jasmine will oversee things here. We've got enough supplies, and you all know the work now. They talked late into the night, making plans. When the first light of dawn began to color the sky, Gary was already saddling his horse. The women gathered to see him off, their faces worried but determined. Jasmine handed him a package of food for the journey. Be careful, she said softly. Those railwren won't take kindly to you gathering witnesses. Gary mounted up, looking down at the group of women who had become his family. Keep each other safe, he said. I'll return as quick as I can. They watched him ride away, the rising sun at his back. Then Jasmine turned to the others, her voice firm. Right then, we've got work to do. Those boundary posts won't uncover themselves. The women straightened their shoulders and headed for their tools. They had a home to defend now, and they meant to keep it. Gary's horse plodded steadily through mountain paths as the sun climbed high overhead. His father's old journal had mentioned a Ute elder named Running Brook, who had helped survey the valley years ago. The journey would take him deep into the foothills where the old man now lived with his grandson's family. The trail grew steeper, winding through stands of pine and aspen. Gary's mount picked its way carefully over loose rocks, its breath coming in heavy puffs. By late afternoon, smoke from cooking fires rose ahead, marking the small settlement. Children playing near the path stopped to stare as Gary approached. An older boy ran ahead to alert the others. Soon, a man about Gary's age emerged from a cabin, raising his hand in greeting. I seek Running Brook, Gary said, dismounting slowly to show respect. My father knew him long ago. The man nodded. My grandfather. He speaks often of the valley settlers from before. He gestured toward a smaller cabin. Come, he will want to hear your words. Inside, an elderly man sat wrapped in a blanket near the hearth, though the day was warm. His eyes were sharp as he studied Gary's face. You have your father's look about you, Running Brook said in careful English. I remember when he first came to mark the valley boundaries. Gary sat cross-legged on the dirt floor. That's why I've come. The railroad claims our land now. They say the survey lines are different. The old man's face darkened. False lines. I walked every post with your father. We marked them true, by the ancient ways. His gnarled fingers traced invisible boundaries in the air. The valley's heart belongs to your people. The spirits witnessed our marking. Would you tell this to others? Gary asked. To help us keep the land? Running Brook was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. I will speak the truth of what was done. The land remembers, even when men try to forget. Relief flooded through Gary. He had found his witness. Meanwhile, back at the homestead, Jasmine kept the women busy with preparations. They reinforced the barn's doors with extra boards and took turns watching the road. The constant threat of the railroad men's return wore on their nerves. We need to be ready, Jasmine told them as they worked. Whatever comes, we face it together. That night, Rebecca's scream jolted everyone awake. Fire! The pasture's burning! They rushed outside to see flames licking across the dry grass of the outer field. Dark shapes on horseback vanished into the distance, leaving destruction in their wake. Form a line! Jasmine shouted, already running for the well. Buckets to everyone! Sarah, get the blankets to beat it back. The women scrambled to obey, passing water buckets hand to hand. Smoke burned their eyes and throats as they fought to contain the blaze. Hours passed in desperate work, their faces streaked with soot and sweat. Dawn finally broke over charred earth. The fire was out, but devastation remained. The women sat exhausted on the blackened ground, their dresses ruined and hands blistered from the work. "All that grass," Catherine whispered. "What will the animals eat now?" Emma began to cry softly. "They won't stop until we're driven out." Jasmine moved among them, offering water and quiet words of comfort. But even her steady presence couldn't fully ease their despair. Late that afternoon, hoofbeats approached. The women tensed until they recognized Gary's return. He pulled his horse up short at the edge of the burned pasture, his face going slack with shock. "No," he breathed, taking in the destruction. He dismounted and walked slowly through the ashes, shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt. "I shouldn't have left you alone." Jasmine approached him quietly, laying a gentle hand on his arm. "You didn't fail us," she said firmly. "We're still standing." He turned to face her, anguish clear in his eyes. "Look at what they did. All because I wasn't here to protect you. We protected ourselves," Jasmine replied. "Yes, they burned the field, but we saved the barn, the house, and each other." She gestured to the women gathering behind her. "We're stronger than they know." "She's right," Catherine added. "We chose to stay and fight, same as you." Gary looked at their smoke-stained faces, seeing not defeat but determination. These women had proved themselves far braver than anyone had given them credit for. "Running Brook will testify," he told them. "He remembers helping mark the true boundaries with my father." Hope flickered across their tired faces. Jasmine squeezed his arm once before letting go. "Then we keep fighting. We'll replant what we can, rebuild what's lost." Her steady gaze held his. Together. The women nodded in agreement, already straightening their shoulders. They had survived the night's trial. They would face whatever came next the same way, standing strong. Standing together. The acrid smell of burned grass hung in the air for days after the fire. Gary and the women worked from sunrise to sunset, clearing charred remnants and preparing the soil for replanting. Their hands grew calloused from raking ash, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. "The ground's still good underneath," Jasmine observed, crumbling dark soil between her fingers. "We can save more than we thought." They scattered seeds across the freshly turned earth, precious handfuls that represented their hopes for survival. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as they labored, but none complained. Each woman had learned the value of working together. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the farmyard, raised voices erupted from inside the cabin. Gary looked up from mending a fence to see Sarah storming onto the porch, her face flushed with anger. "She's been hoarding food," Sarah shouted, pointing back toward the door. "While the rest of us share everything." Catherine appeared in the doorway, clutching a small cloth bundle. "It's my personal rations. I brought them with me, fair and square." The other women gathered, drawn by the commotion. Old tensions bubbled to the surface as quickly as spring water. "My children went hungry back east," Sarah's voice cracked. "I watched them cry themselves to sleep. And now you're hiding extra while we all work together? You don't know what it's like to starve in winter," Catherine shot back. "To watch everything you own disappear into someone else's hands." Gary stepped forward, trying to calm the situation. "Ladies, please." But the dam had broken. Years of hurt and fear poured forth as more women joined in, sharing their own stories of deprivation and loss. Their voices overlapped in a cascade of pain. "My husband gambled everything away. The drought took our whole crop. The bank seized our home." Gary stood helpless, watching as their carefully built unity threatened to crumble. Then Jasmine's clear voice cut through the chaos. "Sisters," she said firmly, moving to stand between the arguing women, "let us pray." The unexpected words caught everyone's attention. Jasmine bowed her head, and slowly the others followed suit. "Creator of all things," she began softly, "remind us that we are one family now. Our hurts are deep, but our strength together is deeper. Help us see past old wounds to the new life we build here. The tension gradually eased from hunched shoulders. When the prayer ended, Sarah wiped her eyes and stepped toward Catherine. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Fear makes me cruel sometimes." Catherine unwrapped her bundle, revealing a few dried apples and corn cakes. "Here, let's share them." All of U.S. Later that night, after the women had gone to bed, Gary found Jasmine sitting alone on the porch steps. The moon cast silver light across the replanted fields. "Thank you," he said quietly, settling beside her, "for knowing what to say when I didn't." Jasmine nodded, her profile thoughtful in the darkness. Sometimes the heart needs healing more than the land. Gary was silent for a long moment, gathering courage to speak what had weighted his mind. "I don't know if I can protect them," he confessed. "Not if it comes to violence." His hands clenched as memories surfaced. "During the war, I carried my brother Thomas from Gettysburg. He died in my arms, shot by a man who probably had a brother too. I swore that I'd never take another life." Jasmine turned to study his face. Courage isn't only found in weapons. Gary Yoder. It lives in staying true to what you believe, in protecting others through steadfastness. "But if the railroad men come with guns, then we'll face them with truth and dignity," she said firmly. "Violence breaks more than bodies. It breaks spirits." Her hand found his in the darkness. "Your gentle strength gives these women hope. Never doubt that." The touch of her fingers sent warmth through his chest, and Gary realized how much he had come to rely on her quiet wisdom. Their eyes met in the moonlight, a moment of deep understanding passing between them. The spell broke at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A rider appeared at the gate, holding up a packet of letters. "Evening mail," he called out, "from Clear Creek." Gary retrieved the letters, recognizing the banker's seal on one envelope. Inside, the message was brief but clear. $300. And back taxes were due within 2 weeks, or foreclosure proceedings would begin. He handed the letter to Jasmine, watching her face as she read. When she looked up, her expression was determined. "They're trying to force us out before we can prove our claim," she said. Gary nodded, his jaw set. "Then we'll have to be ready. The court hearing is our chance to show the truth. We'll prepare." "Together," Jasmine assured him. "Every woman here has a stake in this fight now." They sat in companionable silence, watching stars appear above the darkened valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had reaffirmed what mattered most: their unity, their courage, and their commitment to stand together. Come what may. Morning mist cloaked the valley as Gary spread his father's letters across the kitchen table. The yellowed pages held memories of boundary stakes and handshake agreements, each one carefully preserved through the years. He sorted them by date, building the story of his family's claim to this land. "These 3 mention the creek boundary," he said, passing the letters to Jasmine. Her fingers traced the faded ink as she read aloud. "Mark the north line where Cottonwood Creek bends twice, witnessed by John Running Bear of the Ute people," she read. "Your father was thorough in his records." The other women gathered around, some mending clothes while others helped organize the documents. Mary, the former seamstress, threaded her needle with determination. "We'll need proper dresses for court," she announced. "Can't have them thinking we're just wayward women." Sarah pulled fabric from her trunk, dark blue cotton saved for special occasions. "I've got enough here to make 2 dresses. I can spare some brown wool," Catherine added. "We'll share what we have." The cabin hummed with activity as the women worked. Needles flashed in the lamplight, and the steady scratch of Gary's pen filled the air as he copied out testimony from 3 neighboring farmers who remembered his father's original survey. Jasmine sat nearby, helping him arrange the evidence. "The Ute elder's words will carry weight," she said. "He remembers every tree and stone from 40 years ago." Gary nodded, touching the carefully written statement. Walking the boundaries with him last week, hearing him describe how it was. It felt like my father was with us again. The days passed in a blur of preparation. The women took turns at the sewing, their fingers working late into the night. What began as plain dresses transformed with careful details, neat tucks, pressed pleats, tiny stitches that spoke of dignity and care. Finally, the morning of departure arrived. Dawn painted the sky in pale gold as Gary hitched the horses to 2 wagons. Dew sparkled on spider webs between fence posts, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called its farewell. The Andersons, their closest neighbors, arrived to watch over the farm. "We'll mind your stock," James Anderson promised. "You just focus on winning this fight." The women climbed aboard, their new dresses protected in oilcloth wrapping. Their faces showed mixture of anxiety and determination as the wagons rolled away from the homestead. That the journey proved challenging. Summer rains had carved deep ruts in the trail, forcing them to pick their way carefully. At midday, they encountered a swollen creek, its waters brown and swift. "We'll have to find a safer crossing," Gary announced, leading them upstream. The detour cost precious time, but none complained. They understood too much was at stake to take foolish risks. The afternoon sun beat down as they navigated around muddy patches and over rocky inclines. The women passed a water jug between them, sharing stories to pass the time. Even in their worry, laughter occasionally floated back from the wagon beds. As dusk approached, Gary guided them to a sheltered spot beside the trail. The horses needed rest, and they all needed sleep before tomorrow's confrontation. "Circle the wagons close," he instructed. "We'll have a proper camp tonight." The women worked together with practiced ease, gathering wood and starting a fire. They'd learned these skills over their weeks together, turning from strangers into family. Sarah produced a loaf of journey bread, and Catherine added dried apples she'd been saving. They passed the simple meal around the fire, its light casting warm shadows on tired faces. After the dishes were cleaned, Jasmine's voice rose soft in the darkness. "Among my people, we tell a story," she began. The others drew closer, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. "It's about a mighty warrior who sought the greatest power in all creation." Gary watched her face in the firelight as she continued. "This warrior traveled far, searching for thunder's strength or lightning speed. But Creator showed him a pine seed instead." She opened her palm as if holding one. In that tiny seed was the strength to split rocks, outlast storms, and reach toward heaven, all hidden in something so gentle it could float on a breeze. Her eyes met Gary's across the flames. "Sometimes God hides the greatest strength in gentleness," she said softly, "in patience, in growing things, in hearts that choose love over force." A peaceful silence settled over the camp. One by one, the women spread their blankets under the stars. Gary took first watch, listening to their breathing slow into sleep. Above, the Milky Way stretched like a river of light, and he remembered his father's words about this land. "The right to it lives in how we care for it, son, in how we care for each other." Looking at his sleeping family, for that's what they'd become, he felt their strength flow into him. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, their unity stronger than any fear. The Clear Creek courthouse buzzed with whispers as townspeople packed the wooden benches. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Gary stood at the plaintiff's table, his shoulders straight despite the weight of worry. Behind him, the 8 women sat in their carefully sewn dresses, faces composed but hands clasped tightly in their laps. Across the aisle, the banker lounged in his chair, exchanging knowing smiles with the railroad men. Their expensive suits and polished boots spoke of power and certainty. Their lawyer arranged papers with practiced flourish. Barely glancing at Gary's group, Judge Harrison's gavel cracked against wood. "Case number 423, Yoder Land Claim Dispute. Proceed." Gary stepped forward, his voice steady as he presented his father's letters. The yellowed pages passed from hand to hand, up to the judge's bench. The Ute elder, dressed in his finest clothes, spoke next. His words painted pictures of the valley 40 years past, of marking trees, of agreements made in good faith, of boundaries as clear as the creek itself. The banker's lawyer rose, producing a crisp survey map with elegant lines and official seals. Your Honor, we submit this recent professional survey showing the railroad's rightful claim. His voice dripped with authority. These informal letters cannot override proper documentation. During cross-examination, the lawyer's questions turned sharp. He pointed at the women, his tone suggesting impropriety. Suddenly, Ellen, the quietest of the group, burst into tears. "I can't hold it in anymore," she sobbed. "I was married to James Turner, who worked for the railroad in Kansas Territory." The confession fell like stones in still water. "He abandoned me 2 years ago. I never told anyone here." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The banker's lawyer pounced. "Your Honor, this woman's presence taints everything. How can we trust anything from this unusual household?" His emphasis on unusual drew snickers from his side of the room. Gary felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Everything they'd built seemed to crumble. The judge's frown deepened as whispers hissed through the crowd. Then Jasmine stood, her dark eyes flashing. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I ask you to weigh truth against slander. One woman's past pain does not erase the evidence before you. These letters, this testimony, they speak of honest work and rightful claims. Will you let cruel gossip drown out justice?" The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harrison studied the documents before him, then looked at the anxious faces of Gary's makeshift family. After a long moment, he spoke. "This matter requires more consideration. I will delay judgment until additional evidence can be weighed. Court is adjourned for 1 week." The gavel fell again, leaving hope and fear balanced on a knife's edge. Evening. Shadows crept across the worn floorboards of the Clear Creek boarding house. The women huddled together in the cramped sitting room, their earlier hope dissolved into silence. Gary sat slumped in a wooden chair, his shoulders heavy with defeat. "I've failed you all," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Maybe it's time to accept what's coming." Jasmine stood by the window, lamplight catching the determination in her eyes. She turned to face him, her voice firm and clear. "Gary Yoder, don't you dare give up now. God entrusted us with this valley. We can't surrender his gift." She reached into her shawl and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed with age. "While you were speaking with the judge, I went through your father's trunk one last time. Look what I found beneath the quilt lining." Gary unfolded the document with trembling fingers, his eyes widened as he read. There, in faded ink but clear as day, was an affidavit detailing the property boundaries, witnessed and sealed by Reverend Thompson, the county pastor. 15 years ago. Dawn hadn't yet broken when they rushed back to the courthouse. The pastor, summoned from his morning prayers, studied the seal carefully. "Yes," he declared, "that's my mark, sure as Sunday." Judge Harrison examined the affidavit, his expression thoughtful. He looked at the gathered faces before him, Gary, Jasmine, the women, and the townspeople who had come to watch. Something in their unity seemed to move him. Having reviewed this additional evidence, and considering the testimonies of this community, I find in favor of Mr. Yoder, the judge announced. Furthermore, I fine the bank $500 for attempting to perpetrate fraud upon this court. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Even those who had doubted them now clapped and smiled. Tears streamed freely down Gary's face as Jasmine's warm hand found his, their fingers intertwining in shared triumph. The wagon train wound its way home along the dusty road, moving unhurried beneath the afternoon sun. Hymns floated on the breeze as the women's voices joined in harmony. Amazing Grace drifted across the valley, followed by Be Thou My Vision. Their spirits light with victory. As they crested the final hill, a heartwarming sight awaited them. Dozens of neighbors lined the path to the farmstead, holding fresh-baked loaves and glowing lanterns despite the daylight. Children darted between the adults, waving wildly. Even those who had once whispered doubts now called out greetings. "Welcome home," Mrs. Peterson called, pressing a warm loaf into Gary's hands. Her husband nodded respectfully, a silent apology in his eyes for past judgments. The horses drew the wagons to a stop in the familiar yard. Dust settled around their feet as the women climbed down, their faces bright with joy despite the weariness of travel. The neighbors helped unload their belongings, making quick work of what could have been an hours-long task. As evening approached, they gathered around the long table in Gary's, now their home. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, a far cry from the silent meals Gary had eaten alone for so many years. Platters of food covered every inch of space, brought by welcoming neighbors. When all were seated, Gary bowed his head. The room fell silent as he spoke. "Lord, we thank you for this bounty, for justice done, and most of all for these precious souls you've entrusted to my care. Sisters, mothers, and daughters all." His voice caught slightly. "Thank you for bringing family to this empty house." Across the table, Jasmine's eyes met his, shining with gratitude and something deeper. She smiled softly, and Gary felt his heart grow full. The weeks that followed brought new life to the valley. Hammer strikes rang out as men raised the walls of a schoolhouse near the creek. Jasmine stood in the doorway of the finished building, welcoming not only the women of their household, but children from all the surrounding farms. Her gentle voice carried across the yard as she taught letters and numbers, stories and songs. The women's gardens flourished in neat rows beside the cabin. Corn grew tall, beans climbed their poles, and pumpkins swelled orange among their vines. Gary worked the larger fields with a lighter heart, no longer accompanied only by silence. One golden autumn evening, he paused in his work to look across his land. Lamplight glowed from both cabin and schoolhouse windows, warm beacons in the gathering dusk. Voices and laughter drifted on the evening air. Where once stood just a farm, now stood a true home, a refuge for all who sought fresh starts and second chances. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.